camera. You give it, give it, off, give it, off, down.
You know, when we talk about teenagers doing amazing things on film, the mind naturally wanders towards the X-Men, or Spider-Man, or any number of other teen superheroes. But there are a lot of films that take ordinary human young people and throw them into extraordinary predicaments, just to see how they'll react. A recent example of that might be Hannah, or you know, Wesley Crusher. But one of the primary examples of the genre for many a person who grew up in the 80s is the 1984 classic Red Dawn, which is what we're going to talk about today on the latest edition of Half Good. Yeah, I said it, I'm putting this movie firmly into the half-good category, and not just because it is hilariously dated, which it obviously is. Set in a kind of alternate universe, the film takes place in an America that's become dangerously isolated from the rest of the international community, and is subsequently invaded by communists. That's basically the gist of its pre-movie background role, which explains how the Soviet Union suffers from a famine and then invades Poland because they don't have any food either. Okay. Anyway, the Greens Party, quote-unquote, takes over West Germany, Mexico plunges into revolution for some reason, and then NATO dissolves. And the United States stands alone, which is awfully inconvenient when the Soviet Union and Cuba comes knocking on Texas's door, intent on taking over the fertile parts of the U.S. to feed their hungry masses. Apparently they didn't learn anything from Stalin, who actually created artificial famines to rid himself of undesirable portions of the population. Anyway, a motley crew of Soviet and Cuban troops wind up in Calumet, Colorado, a speck of a town that apparently requires an entire division of troops to occupy it. Of course, that doesn't sit well with the youths of the town, who manage to escape to the mountains nearby to regroup before deciding to give a mighty rebel yell and strike back against the communist interlopers.
Wolverines! What is that? Sniper!
What follows is as staunch a melodrama as you're likely to see among high-profile films of the 80s. Red Dawn is by no means a terrible film. It's pretty watchable, actually, with the conflicts and issues that the characters struggle with feeling relatively forceful. And no one's going to shed a tear at the sight of Soviets and Cuban soldiers getting ripped apart by good-looking, football-playing, red-blooded American teenagers. That is indeed what happens for the better part of the film.
Run this way!
The movie was originally intended to be something more serious and dark, with the teens in the group turning upon each other in the absence of a government or parents. The studio shifted directions, though, and according to Peter Bart, hired Alexander Haig, Reagan's former Secretary of State, to help shape the film's script and make it less like Lord of the Flies and more like Rambo. That dichotomy is well in hand in the film, which seems to shift between two modes. One mode has the teens partaking in increasingly masturbatory battle sequences. For the first half of the film, they pull off one unlikely victory after another against their well-trained and well-armed enemies, freeing prisoners and gathering unlikely amounts of weaponry. They never seem to be in any real danger in a lot of these scenes and manage to rack up a kill-death ratio that would make even professional Call of Duty players sport an erection. The other much shorter parts of the film see the teens engaging in light introspection and tearing up over the violence that fate has thrown in their laps. These scenes feel somewhat like the remnants of a smarter script that was cannibalized in the name of more and more action. Red Dawn was actually the first film to be released with a PG-13 rating, and at the time of its release held a Guinness record for most violence in a film with 2.23 violent acts per hour. The politics of the film are also a little weird, more akin to the kind of things you'd hear on an early morning AM radio station than in a major motion picture. Illegal immigrants from Mexico are said to be among the agent provocateurs. The only politician in the film, Calumet's mayor, immediately turns into a fawning stoolie for the invaders. The Soviets immediately start looking for ATF records when they land to round up all the citizens who were foolish enough to abide by gun control laws. And Europe as a whole happens to pussy out and refuses to stand up to the Soviets while they roll across the world. If you can imagine a film written and directed by Walter from The Big Lebowski, you'd be on the right track. The Coen brothers actually based that character on their good friend John Milius, director and co-writer of Red Dawn. Despite all this, it does deserve a lot of credit for attempting to be a relatively realistic look at how insurgent cells form in the event of an invasion, even if it isn't quite the battle for Algiers. And it does deal with the consequences of the teens' actions by showing retaliatory civilian slaughter. And of course, it doesn't exactly have a rah-rah ending, as most of the kids wind up dead. In that regard, Top Gun still edges it out as being the most overt military recruitment ad of the 1980s.
You are still dangerous. You can be my wingman anytime.
Red Dawn's worst sin might be the embarrassingly hammy acting from almost every member of the cast, as well as writing that strives to be naturalistic but just manages to be awkward, such as in the kinda hilarious "Don't Ever Cry Again" scene.
Don't cry. Don't you ever cry again. As long as you live. As long as you live, never do it.
It's an impressive cast for an 80s film with people like Patrick Swayze and Jennifer Grey, who would go on to make Dirty Dancing immediately afterward, as well as Leah Thompson, C. Thomas Howell, and of course, it marked the film debut of one Charlie Sheen.
Don't you make yourself useful?
All of these actors would go on to bigger and better things, as Red Dawn definitely feels like an opportunity for most of them to take off their training wheels. As an artifact of the last gasp of the Red Scare, Red Dawn is a little hokey to modern eyes, although it has of course had a lasting legacy in video games, where everything from World in Conflict to Freedom Fighters to Modern Warfare 2 has had a variation on the Soviets invading America theme. It's also inspired a remake that was shot way back in 2009, this time changing the Soviets to Chinese soldiers, who they are going to digitally change to North Koreans to avoid upsetting our major import partner. I'm sure John Milius would find that wryly amusing, much in the same way that I find Red Dawn wryly amusing today. It's a film that has its heart in the right place, and one can hardly blame it for not being as relevant to Americans 25 years after it came out as it might have been at the time, but it's mostly interesting now as a bit of pre-Glasnostian fantasy. Although, given the way the world is going now, who's to say that it might not fade back into the realm of prescience again in the future? And that's it for another edition of Half Good, but stay tuned to Screen.com for another video feature soon enough. Naskrovia.
I say we vote on it.
No.
This isn't the big game, Mr. Quarterback. He can go wherever he wants.
No.
You're such a goddamn jock.
And that's it for another edition of Half Good here on Screen.com. Please stay tuned to our website for another video feature soon enough. Thanks for stopping by. That was really dumb. Sorry. And that'll do it for another edition of Half Good. But stay tuned to Screen.com for more compelling video features in the near future. Thanks. Sorry, I'll do one more. That's it. And that is it. And that's it for another edition of Half Good. But stay tuned to Screen.com for another video feature soon enough. Naskrovia. Yeah. I don't know. You have to pick one.